Welcome to this guitar lesson. In this lesson, we're going to learn about guitar chord shapes. We're going to talk about how shapes are different from chords, and we're going to talk about notes and how notes work within chords and shapes. We're also going to touch on the capo and using the capo to play shapes and chords and notes on the guitar neck. And lastly, this is the kind of the foundational concept of what we call the caged system. It's an acronym for the 5 major chord shapes that exist on the guitar that you have probably already learned at this point, or maybe not. The caged system is the guitar, so the more you can learn about the caged system and how it works, the more you will learn about the guitar, and that is really what we're going to be talking about in this video, is the caged system. So the concept of shapes. I'm going to use a metaphor to kind of explain this as best I possibly can. Here we can see a couple of geometric shapes. We don't need to know anything about these shapes other than that we can look at them and we can see that they're different from each other, and we have different names for them. Now here are the shapes on the guitar that we use to play chords, and everyone is familiar with these if you've been playing guitar for longer than probably about a day. We have the C chord, the A chord, G, E, and D. And just like the rectangle, circle, and triangle, we can see that each of these are different shapes as well. That each of them is different from each other, and we don't even need to know anything about them to recognize that this is a C chord and it looks like a C chord, in the same way that we can see a triangle and recognize it as being a triangle. Whether we know, all the specifics of what makes a triangle, or what makes a C chord, it doesn't matter. We can just look at it and we can see that it is a C chord, an A chord, a G chord, an E chord, and a D chord. Now, after we learn these shapes really well and we memorize what they look like, then we can start to recognize them whenever we see them. Once we learn the C chord shape, then we can not only see it in things like diagrams and chord charts and things like that, but we can also see them in our fingers, and we know what the C chord looks like to look down at our fingers and see this is a C chord. That goes for all of the chord shapes as well. We look at them and we can immediately recognize them. That is the goal of learning our chord shapes. Okay, now let's touch on chords, and we'll talk about what's the difference between a chord and a shape on the guitar. Now, a shape is these right here, and these shapes tell us where do we put our fingers, how do we arrange them on the strings and on the frets to get the chords. Now, what is a chord? A chord is a combination of notes. The C chord, for instance, is a combination of the notes C, E, and G. And each of these open chords gives us a different combination of notes. Therefore, it gives us a different chord for each of these shapes. Now, there's one note that is the most important note in any chord, and that's what we call the root note. The root note is the note from which the chord gets its name. And when we combine a root note with a major or minor chord shape, then that tells us the equation for what do we call that chord, what is its full name. So the C major chord has the root note C. We use a major shape to play it. Therefore, we call it C major, as opposed to A minor, which is the root note A, and we use a minor shape to play that chord. Therefore, it is A minor. The other most important thing about the caged chord shapes and root notes is where the root note is on the guitar. Which string is it on? The C shape has a root note on the A string, as well as the A shape. Those both have root notes on the A string. The G and the E shapes have root notes on the E string, the lowest E string. And the D shape has a root note on the D string. Now, when we're talking about notes and root notes and everything, it's very important to realize that we have to know where the notes are on the fretboard in order to know what notes we're playing and therefore what chords we are playing. When I teach my students to memorize the notes on the neck, I only have them do the natural notes. So the natural notes is A, B, C, D, E, F, and G, the circle of the musical alphabet. These natural notes are the only ones that we have to memorize to start off with. And then after that, we can start to look at notes that are sharp and flat. Now, sharp means we have a natural note. Let's take A, for instance, and we raise it by a half step. That makes it A sharp. Now, if we take that A sharp and we sharp it again, it then becomes B, the natural note B. So sharp does not mean we add a sharp symbol or sharp name to a note. Sharp means that we raise that pitch by one fret. We raise that note by one fret. And sometimes that will make an A into an A sharp. But if we sharp A sharp, we raise it one fret higher, now we have the note B, and we can keep going. We can sharp the note B, and then we can get the note C, or we can also call that B sharp as well. So sharp simply means to raise the note by one half step or one fret. Flat, on the other hand, is the opposite. It is lowering the pitch or lowering a note by a half step. So A, if we flat it, it becomes A flat. And then if we flat A flat, we lower it by a half step, it becomes G, or we can call it G. When you're learning the notes on the neck, there are a number of different methods, and I have a video about that on this channel. Just focus on learning the natural notes at first. Worry about sharps and flats later. The faster and the better you get the natural notes down, the more immediate and more quickly you will be able to see and recognize the sharp and the flat notes as well. Okay, now let's look at the first chord shape in the caged system, which is the C chord shape. Now, here it is. My fourth finger here is just resting on the low E string, and that has this effect. It's muting that string so that it doesn't ring. And that's because usually we have the low E string muted for the C chord. So you can hear that that low E string is muted. Okay, now let's introduce the capo. Now we've got our capo here on the first fret. This means that all of the strings are ringing at the first fret when we play them open, and the notes on the first fret are all one half step higher than they are at the open string without a capo. Now, when we play our C chord shape, it sounds just a little bit different than it did when we played without the capo. Here it is back and forth with each other. You can hear when it's on capo 1, everything sounds higher pitched than it did without the capo. And that's because all of the notes in our chord shape have been raised or sharped by one half step each. If you take a look at the diagram that's on screen right now, you can see that the shape that we're still playing is still the C chord shape. It has not changed. But look at the root note here under the third finger. That's on the fourth fret. What note is that? That's either a C sharp or a D flat. This means that this chord is either a C sharp major chord or a D flat major chord. We can call it either. So we've just seen how we are playing a C shape, but we're getting a chord that is something other than a C chord. So the reason that the caged chord shapes are named the way that they are is because when we play those caged shapes without a capo in the open position, the chord matches the name of the shape that we get when we play that shape. So the C chord without a capo in the open position makes a C chord. But as soon as we put a capo on the first fret and we play a C shape, we're now getting either a C sharp major chord or a D flat major chord. Now, what if I still want to play that D flat major chord right here? Let's just call it D flat major. What if we want to play that D flat major chord, but let's say we don't have a capo with us. So let's take our capo off. Well, we can still play it with the same C shape, all by just rearranging our fingers. So I'm going to take my fingers and rearrange them like this. Now, my first finger up here has replaced the capo for the open strings. And I'm still getting all the exact same notes. And this is still, therefore, a D flat major chord. The A chord shape, some people play it like this, with all three of their fingers stacked on top of each other. Or maybe like this, with them all side to side. But for me personally, I like to play it with just a single finger barring across those three strings that you see in the diagram right now. Now the A chord right here, we can do the same thing that we just did with the C chord. And again, we'll just put our capo here on the first fret. Now let's play our A chord shape together again. Hopefully you're following along with your guitar in this video. Let's play our A chord shape again. Now we can hear that again all of the pitches of the A chord have been raised, and this is now giving us a B flat major chord. Because the notes that we're getting, well, the notes are the notes of the B flat major chord, but also our root note, which is the open A string here under the capo, on the first fret, that note is B flat. So the root note is B flat, and we're playing a major chord shape. Therefore, this chord is B flat major, using the A chord shape. Now again, just like with the C chord, what if we want to play that B flat major chord, but we don't have a capo, or we don't want to use a capo, or we can't use a capo? So what do we do then? We do the same thing that we did with the C chord. We take our capo off, and now we have to rearrange our fingers so that our fingers can cover the root notes. And we can do that like this. Where we are playing a bar chord like that. Or usually I'll play it like this, where my second finger now is muting the low E string, and my first finger here is getting the root note, and it can also press down the note on the first string as well. But now my third finger is being the bar for those three strings. And this is still a B flat major chord using the A chord shape. Now let's take a look at our G chord shape. Most people learn their G chord shape like this. And that's a pretty difficult shape. It's using all four of the fingers, but I play it a little bit differently. And the way that I play it only uses one finger, and it looks like this. And it sounds a little bit different too. So what I'm doing here is I'm using my second finger here to fret the third fret of the sixth string, which is the note G. And that same finger is also muting the A string right next to it. And then after that, we have the next three strings are all ringing open. And also the first top string is also muted. And you can see these three fingers here not really doing a whole lot. They're just sitting there. All right, now with the capo on the first fret again, you know the drill. Here we go, play our G chord. Now what's our root note? See if you can figure it out for yourself. Pause the video if you want to, I'll wait. Okay, so what's the root note? It's A flat there, and now this is on the 4th fret. And this is something that I also want to say about all of these chords and the root notes. When you're learning your chord shapes, learn how many frets from the open string the root note is, because that can help you later on when you're learning to play in a certain key. You can find your root note and plug in your shape, and we'll talk about this later in the video, but then you have to figure out where to put the capo. And knowing how many frets away from the open string your root note is will tell you exactly where to put the capo. So now we've got this nice A flat major chord. Now here we go, we'll take the capo back off and we'll see how we play this without a capo. So to take that one finger G chord shape that's so nice and easy to play, this is why I teach it this way, to be able to play it without a capo as an A flat chord, we have to rearrange our fingers a little bit. So now my root note is underneath my 4th finger here, and I am also using my 3rd finger right here, which can mute that string, or it can fret a note there, and that note is C for this chord. But I've also got my 1st finger performing a bar on those 3 strings, which were open before, but now we have to use our finger to play them. So we use that finger to replace the capo, and it sounds like this. Okay, now we're talking about the E chord shape. This you might recognize in a couple different ways when we talk about it, when we move it up higher on the neck without a capo. But here it is. Nice big open chord. And that's using all 6 strings. Now when we take our E chord shape and we put it on a capo here on the 1st fret and we play it, this is now an F chord. And this is probably already looking familiar to some people out there. So we can see that the F chord is using the E shape here. And the same thing applies to this chord as it did to all the others. Now if we take off the capo, let's see what happens. So here's what it turns into. We rearrange our fingers like this, and this one's pretty difficult. This is the bar chord shape that so many people have so much trouble with when they are starting to learn guitar. There. And if you are learning an F chord as a beginner, a lot of my students, when they're learning an F chord, they say, oh, I hate the F chord. I have such a hard time playing the F chord. And there are lots of different ways that I will like to make that easier for them. But that's not this video. This video is just showing you that that F chord that you probably learned as its own chord and as its own shape, or thought of it as its own shape, it's actually just the E chord shape with all of the notes raised 1/2 step. Now we're looking at the D chord shape. Here it is. Now let's add the capo. And you know what? I got tired of the 1st fret, so I've put the capo here on the 2nd fret. Now let's see what happens when we play our D shape again. Check it out. What's the root note of this chord? It's on the open D string at the 2nd fret where the capo is. That note is the note E. So we can actually use the D shape to play an E chord, which is kind of funny because we already have a shape which we can use to play an E chord. But that shape is back here behind the capo now. So we can't actually play it because our root note is here at the open string and our capo is on the 2nd fret here. So this is something about the cage system that we can recognize and that we can have a lot of power in, is that any of these shapes can make any major chord. And any minor chord shape can also make any minor chord. The only thing that matters is where is the root note, what is the root note, and what shape are you going to play. Okay, now with the capo off, let's play that E chord again with the root note on the 2nd fret right here on the D string. And this one's a little bit tricky, at least it is for me anyway. I always find the D shape is the hardest one to play without a capo when I'm using it to play different chords. So we have to take our fingers and kind of stretch them out like this, which is a little bit of a stretch. You can see I'm trying to mess around with my wrist angle here and my arm angle to try and make it more comfortable for myself. But this is just a difficult chord shape to play without a capo, and that's all. It just takes a little bit of practice. So when you're practicing, think about these things. What do we need to do to play a chord shape? Well, first of all, we need to learn all of our chord shapes in the open position. So if you haven't done that already, do that. With your C chord, and your A chord, and your G chord, and your E chord, and your D chord. The first thing to do really is to learn all 5 of those chord shapes, and later on you can learn the minor chord shapes as well. A minor, E minor, and D minor. Those are your major and minor chord shapes. So you learn those, and once you do that, you learn the notes on the neck. Learn just the natural notes on the neck. You know, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and after G comes A, so the circle of the alphabet. Now we can start to really dig in and practice with these shapes and place them anywhere we want to on the neck, as is the purpose of the caged system. So the first thing that we do is we pick a root note. We pick a chord that we want to play. Let's say we want to play, I don't know, an F sharp major chord. Great. Now, how do we do it? We have 5 different shapes to choose from. Let's pick a shape. Let's say we use the C shape to play the F sharp major chord. Okay, so we have to remember, where is the root note of the C shape? It's on the A string. So on the A string, that's where we need to look for an F sharp. And here it is right here on the 9th fret, right there. So there's where our root note is of our chord. Now we can plug our shape in. And we've got an F sharp major chord. We can even put our capo there, remembering which fret our capo goes on depends on how far away the root note is from the open string. So in the C chord shape, the root note is 3 frets higher than the open string. So we have a root note and we count back 3 frets. 1, 2, 3. That is where we put our capo. In this case, it's on the 6th fret right here. Well, my capo's in my pocket. Let me get it out and put it on the 6th fret right there. And now we can play this chord F sharp major with the C shape with a capo, or even without a capo. Put it back in my pocket there, without a capo as well. And you can see it sounds exactly the same, because all I've done is I have replaced my capo with my finger. I've rearranged my fingering